to let everyone join in the room. The room is filling, and we will begin in just a second. Yeah, so I think we're ready to go. Hi, everyone. Okay, let's get started. Welcome to our 5th episode of Seen It First, sponsored by Fictionary, your story editing software. In this series, we sit down with award-winning best-selling authors to discuss first scenes, explore writing craft, and celebrate the stories that thrill and inspire us all. I'm James Gallagher, a copy editor and Fictionary certified story coach, and tonight we are very pleased to welcome Deborah Halverson.
Hello.
Deborah was an editor at Harcourt Children's Books for 10 years and is now the award-winning author of Writing YA Fiction for Dummies and Writing New Adult Fiction. She's also written the teen novels Honk, If You Hate Me, and Big Mouth, which we're going to look at in just a little bit. So get your hot dogs ready. That'll make sense a little bit more further on. She is the creator of the picture book Letters to Santa and the 3 books in the remix series for struggling readers. Deborah is also a freelance editor, writing instructor, and founder of the popular writing advice website, deareditor.com. She serves on the advisory board of the University of California, San Diego Children's Book Writing and Illustrating Certificate Program and speaks extensively at writing conferences and workshops. For everyone here for the next half hour, we're going to be talking to Deborah about YA fiction, and we're going to look at the first scene of Big Mouth in Fictionary. We'll have a few minutes at the end of the session for questions, but also feel free to pop questions into the chat at any time. As a special bonus for attendees, Deborah has been kind enough to supply us with a cheat sheet for writing YA and middle grade fiction, and we'll be sending that out to attendees after the session. Deborah, how are you tonight?
I'm doing wonderful, thank you. I was just saying I'm getting a nice break. I've been given a quiet house because my sons who are graduating from high school this week found out that today they get, every graduate, high school graduate can go up to Krispy Kreme donuts and get a free dozen donuts. So I think it's going to be pretty rowdy here soon, but I'm really enjoying the quiet space now to visit with you all.
Yeah, that's fantastic. It's fantastic to have triplets graduating from high school. That's amazing. Is there anything I've missed in your bio or anything that you're working on or have coming out that you'd like to tell us about?
You were pretty thorough with it, James. I'm working on a couple of craft books about, one is about writing romance for YA romance, young adult fiction romance. And so I'm working on that one, hoping that to have that come out soon. I'm also trying to find the balance that everybody struggles with in finding time to just write my own fun stories, the whole writing, work, life balance. And so I've started playing with the idea of a teen adventure series that follows a whole group of teens through their particular adventure. So that's the one that's on my plate, and I've got a few things out for submission. One of the fun things about writing in the children's book world is I edit, I read, and I write from picture books, chapter books, all the way up to middle grade and young adult fiction. And so I've got my fingers in a project from pretty much every one of those categories. So I'm at a space where I have to start prioritizing instead of starting them, start working on and finishing them.
It's a difficult thing. We've had that come up in a couple of our other interviews, and we haven't hit on an definitive answer yet. So we'll keep working on it.
I find that just when I feel like I've worked it out, things change and I have to go back to the drawing board and work it out again. So I'm sure everyone can relate to that.
Well, I was going to ask because for many people, the world inside of publishing is very mysterious, and so it would be interesting for us to hear a little bit about what your role was and what you did in Harcourt and what lessons you brought out of that you were able to then later apply to your writing.
Well, one of the lucky things about working in San Diego, certainly in the 1990s, was there was a publisher called Harcourt Children's Books here. Many people knew them as HBJ, Harcourt Brace Jovanovich, and they eventually got down to just Harcourt. And so I was able to work in the traditional publishing world while living in San Diego instead of moving to New York. And I got my foot in there in the children's books department. I didn't know at the time that that's what I would be working on. That's the job that came open during my job search time. And I started out as an editorial assistant in the managing editorial department. And I really think that's a fabulous way to learn how books are made, because the job there is to copy edit the manuscripts and to proofread them, but it's also to manage the projects from the whole through every stage. You take it from the developing editor or the acquiring editor, as they call whatever they call themselves in that house. You take it over to the book designer, then you move it to production, you bring it back again. And so you're tracking the process all the way through, and you learn how a book is made all the way down to are the marketing materials ready in time for the launch date? So I did that, but then I knew I didn't want to spend my time proofreading. People who proofread are amazing editors and they have encyclopedic knowledge. They and copy editors of rules, of grammar, of punctuation, etc. I really wanted to be on the developmental side, so I moved over to an editor who was developing picture books. And at Harcourt, we were allowed to do the whole thing. So I learned to, and then became an editor of picture books, of chapter books, not many of those at the time, and middle grade and young adult fiction. So I really got a feel for the whole space. And so when I had my 3 sons and I couldn't work in an office setting anymore 5 days a week, that's when I went freelance. And I was also by that point writing my own books. And so I was able to use that experience to understand what it is to be on both sides of the desk to writing young adult fiction for dummies books. So it all kind of came together. And I just found out that the children's book space, that's my world, that's where my people are. And I love spending my free time and professional time within it.
Well, thank you so much for that. It's wonderful to have that, and for everyone here to have that glimpse into publishing. I want to talk a little bit about the writing YA fiction for dummies book. But first, I want to say, when I was a kid, I'm 52, so in the 80s, I was basically just before Goosebumps, and I feel like I went from like Encyclopedia Brown right to Stephen King. So it was a very different market then. So if you could talk just a little bit about the main characteristics and where those lines are between middle grade YA and new adult.
James, what you talk about, it happened for a lot of people, especially back then, and myself included. I read all the Encyclopedia Brown books and all that, but then I went into the garage and read all my dad's Clive Cussler books, and just right to the grown-up books. I kind of dabbled in a little bit of the Judy Blume and Beverly Cleary. So that's why when I got the job at Harcourt, I gave myself a crash course on getting all caught up on the books that I hadn't read when I was a young adult and a middle grader. And so when I came to Harcourt in 1995, that was about when the first Harry Potter book came out. And suddenly grown-ups were reminded that books for young people can be as complex as those and rewarding as those for adults. They have amazing plot lines and character building and world building. And so then we had our explosion in middle grade and teen fiction, and grown-ups reading them, young people reading them. It was very exciting to come into publishing at that time. And so when I wrote the Writing Young Adult Fiction for Dummies, I'll just call it the Dummies book. You're not dummies if you're reading it. I wanted to make, they only had so much room in the title, so I made sure that it covered middle grade fiction too. So that's in there as well. And really the players are the same in young adult and middle grade fiction. It's often the same editors are doing those projects, as was the case at Harcourt. The same agents are representing them. So it's the same players involved, the same techniques. And so the difference is understanding the mindset of the young readers. And so that's what I focused on. That's what I enjoy the most. And so when I look at middle grade or teen fiction, I'm looking at the mindset of young people. Young people tend to think big. They're very hyperbolic. Their dreams, they're incredibly optimistic. They dream big. They don't necessarily have, they're smart. Young people are smart, but they don't have that wisdom that we can bring, that life gives you through experience. Certainly, that's what we want to happen in a novel from beginning to end. We want them to gain some wisdom, to mature in some way. We want to see that, but certainly not so much at the beginning. And when you're writing middle grade, that's going to be a little less pronounced. When you're writing teen, they're going to have a little bit more of that maturity and sophistication. So when I look at teaching people how to write that kind of fiction, I talk to them about having a looser grammar than an adult might have, maybe not quite so proper. They talk in a lot of hyperbolic ways. They don't analyze. They don't say, oh, my mom is stressed out all the time because work is so hard. And so we fight. They'll say, why is she getting on my case? What did I do? I didn't do anything to her. It kind of starts at a place that's self-centric and then moves out. And by the end of the book, they might have that more experience where they start empathizing with mom and say, oh gosh, she's stressed. And they would do the same with their circles of friends. Certainly with our younger people, the cast of the book, the characters, the younger they are, the cast is more immediate. It's their home and their club or their school, their neighborhood. When it's a teen, it starts expanding. By the time you get to new adults, you're moving out from home and starting a new life and finding a new definition of family in terms of your immediate whereabouts. So I find that I'll just call it teen fiction for the moment. Teen fiction tends to, and this is on the handout that I gave you, actually, they have intense relationships. They have a strong sense of rejecting help because they want to be independent. And that leads to worsening problems, which of course we always want. They think big, they exaggerate, they have big dreams, and they believe anything is possible. And so it all starts from there and how they tackle the problems of their particular experience. You don't have kind of the jaded take that you would with an adult novel or narrator. So hopefully I've given that in the handout that everyone will get, that you get that sense of what makes it distinct. It's a narrative mindset. It's the mindset of young people.
And I wanted to show everyone too, if you can see, it's really a extensive resource. So it's a big book, but it's also very accessible and definitely the kind of book that's very well organized. So it's divided into sections where you have prepping for writing and writing, creating your characters and your plot, and right through to marketing and publishing, editing and revising, of course. So it's a fantastic work. And one of the things you talk about in the book is developing the theme that you write under, and that's something that is often a little difficult for writers, or even they miss that when they're first developing their books. So maybe you could talk just a little bit about the theme and how, when you're writing YA, you make it universal and timeless while also being very much in the present.
Right. The universality of it very much goes to, we know what stages young people are in those teen years, and so we can plug into that. We understand that maybe that's a place where they're experimenting in love for the first time. So we can hit those. Every book you can kind of say we have these universal themes, but we find out the specific, once you have that idea you want to cover. For instance, because I know we're going to talk about Big Mouth, so I'll mention that. The character in Big Mouth is Sherman Thuff, and he's 14, and he wants to be the fastest, richest, most famous competitive eater in the entire world. There's that hyperbole there. But what matters is this is a place where he's in that phase where they're really trying to define themselves. and how they fit into this expanding world that they have. And they're starting to think about the future. They don't have any context in it. And so I knew I wanted to talk about competitive eating. I wanted to write some story about that. So that was my topic. When I talked about universal themes, I was realizing that this person, he's dreaming of what he can become, because at this point in 7th grade, you're just kind of one of the masses. When you start going into high school, you start defining who you are and who your peers are and all that. And so that's a mix of the universal understanding where he is at that time in his life, and the specific, which is my topic of competitive eating, and even more specifically, eating disorders in boys. Kind of a sneaky way to come at something very serious.
Yeah, and I really loved that too, because that's something that I think popularly you hear a lot more about eating disorders with girls, and it's such an important subject to talk about with boys and men as well. One of the one of my favorite lines from the book was, "I've seen the future is hot dogs." That really made me laugh. But we're
I'm glad you like that. Thank you.
yeah, it's a really fun book with an important theme as well. I think I have 1,000 questions, but these always go so fast. We're gonna open up the scene in Fictionary now, and if we have time, I did want to get in the book you have 10 pitfalls to avoid when writing YA fiction. So maybe you have a quick pitfall for us before we get to the scene.
Oh, right now, before we get to the scene. That's okay. That's okay. I really wanted to stress, I would love to stress the fact that these young people are not so great at assessing, at least at the beginning of the novel, other people's motives very well. That's a really big deal. That can make a book sound far more sophisticated and out of the team realm. And one of the things that you hear from editors all the time, well, hopefully what is said by them, hopefully you don't hear it, but is that they sound too old for the category. And so one of the main things I like to hit is making sure they're not sounding too wise for their age. So that's why it's one of the first things I bring up whenever I talk about it. So that's one of the big pitfalls there.
Yeah, that's a great insight. What you have here is your first scene in Fictionary. If this were your entire book, you would have all of the chapters and scenes listed down the left column, where you could jump around between them. These first 4 chapters are our first 4 guests, so we're only having the first scene here, but you can see that you have your writing area in the center of the screen, and then you have these different 38 story elements that you can take a really good scene by scene look at your book and track it across elements of character, plot, and setting. I think if Shane, if you want to bring up the word cloud, I thought the word cloud might be fun on this one. Yeah, we see some of the. This is just a fun tool to see some of the things that jump out at you and give you a fun look at the chapter. But
I can definitely comment on that, because
oh,
I can see it right away. I wanted the book to be very physical. And I see the word attacked and blasted, and even busy. And I wanted it to be very filled with this very sensual, especially as applies to food because of his relationship with food. And so I see a lot of ached is a physical thing, but aroma, bananas. Yeah, that's interesting. Those are the things I wanted to come out.
Yeah, it's a really fun tool. Something else is there's under character we have the software brings up a character list, and you see all the characters in your scene. You can then go to insights and see where characters and what scene your characters will enter the story, what scenes they appear in, how many scenes they appear in. One of the things I loved about the book was that the names of your characters were so fun, and Sherman Thuff, you had the Are You Thuffinov, you had all these plays on the names of some of the other, you had Gardo, and the principal, I think, was Culpepe, maybe, but it be a lot of fun. It seemed like we were having a lot of fun with the names, and I could see where that really added to reader enjoyment as well.
Well, even the high school is Del Heine High School or junior high school. That's a combination of Del Monte and Hines, because you don't see it at the beginning, but the school, this was a phase where a lot of stadiums were being renamed to product stadiums like Petco Park and stuff. And I thought, well, schools are struggling for funding, so maybe they'll license out schools. And so a ketchup company started funding the schools. So all the schools are have ketchup company names, and Roma tomatoes, ketchup mascots. And I don't know, it just seemed kind of fun.
I thought so too. And we have the third sort of set of things that we look at is setting. And I thought that in this age group, school, the classroom, the cafeteria, those are all going to play a lot. But I thought what you did with the setting and the whole the ketchup sponsorship and the mustard protesters added a lot of fun. But it was a way to add another element to setting that was unique and a fun way to play with that.
I feel like setting is an important element for writers. Certainly what happens, the younger your book goes, the more action and dialogue kind of takes over. And so I encourage writers to bring setting back in by making setting a player and a character, not just a description, because people worry, certainly when they're writing middle grade, if they pause too long for setting descriptions. So I'd like to encourage people to make it a player in there. Otherwise, you just have a character acting in front of a blue screen. There's no context for them. So thank you for your kindness, your compliments on that.
One thing that we always ask, because it's very difficult to know when to start your story. So why did you choose this scene, and what was the importance of the scene that you chose to open your story with?
So I opened the story with Shermy purging. That is after he had done his first stuffing hot dogs in his body. And it just seemed kind of fun to do it that way. And I went all in with the noises and stuff, because I said I wanted it to be a very tangible physical experience. And I actually wrote that particular scene while I was pregnant. And so I was intimately familiar with morning sickness. But so that part, the blurb on the book calls it a deeply gross and terribly funny story or something like that. I just thought that would be a fun way to do it. But it's actually a subtle way of saying we're going to talk about I tried to slip in the unhealthy eating, the eating disorders for boys, and to me it was a signal that we're going to have some serious stuff in here about the experience of purging and all that. So it just seemed kind of a fun way to open, and I suppose some people might find it gross, but that's okay. That was sort of the intention.
Yeah, well, and as someone who's probably forever always a 12-year-old boy in some way, I appreciated the gross stuff as well, and I think a lot of people do. It is a lot of fun, and you did such a fantastic job of maintaining that balance. One thing with when you look at something like even like a mystery where the detective is so important, and that's so important for even more than plot, for bringing readers back for different items in the series. How important is that main character, your protagonist in YA fiction?
I always like to I encourage action with that young character right at the beginning that reveals who they are. It doesn't have to be explosive. In this way, it's explosive, what I didn't initially mean. I meant car explosions. It doesn't have to be that kind of thing. But I like to see that young person in action so we can find out their values or their reactions. And in fact, one of my personal mottos is I like to put normal characters in extreme circumstances and see what happens to them. And so I'm inclined to see action in an opening scene for a young person that has, say, the young person climbing on the porch to get a cat out of the, we find out their value system for that. We find out how much risk they're willing to take. As they're up there, we find out if it's a shaky porch roof, how many cars are going by, if it's a nice neighborhood or a busy one. So you can find out a lot about their space, but the focus is on the character. And I feel like they need to make the connection to the character first and foremost if they're going to read. I would think that's important for grownups as well, but just knowing my focus on young people, they want to connect with that person and cheer for them, and then they find out what their problem is going to be. But if you can put it in a context that is interesting, some kind of action that reveals them, then I think you've got a good grabbing opening, or at least the potential for such.
Yeah, well, and I think you definitely did. The other thing, before we go to any questions, I think we really have to ask about, because probably something that people struggle with is dialogue. And do you have any tips for writing dialogue that is authentic to your age group?
Yes, this will be on the handout that you get. One of the things I try and to encourage people is don't use slang to try and sound 16. Instead, use, like I mentioned, the loose grammar sentences that are not so proper. So instead of a young person saying, stop running, they might say, quit with all the running, or don't be doing that. It's something that's a bit looser and shows their personality, without them saying, don't be doing that, dude, or, that sort of thing. I encourage people to stay with kind of simple words for the dialogue. It's not because young people can't use big words. We know them and they can read them in context, certainly. But when they're speaking, even grownups generally stay within the most comfortable everyday words. And it can be incredibly fun if you see your same character use code switch, I think they call it, so that when they're talking to a grown-up who comes into the scene, suddenly they'll start pulling out those big words, and you'll see the code switching there. But certainly among their peers, to relax the vocabulary, relax the grammar, lots of exaggerations. Some of the things Shermy does is he talks about, he's got more, what did he say? There's more charge in my hair than Darth Vader had stormtroopers, or things like that, talking big exaggerations. I think that helps a young person who's talking sound younger. And then again, make the conversation about the speaker. I mentioned that young people tend to be self-centered. That's not selfish. That is rather, it starts with me. How do things affect me first? So they would start with that objection. What did I do to you? Not what's wrong with you. Hopefully they'd get to the place where they are more empathetic of that, but that can make them sound younger as well. And just naturally in that space.
Yeah, thank you. Those are some more really great insights. And I also still exaggerate quite a bit at times. So
it's the best.
Shane, do we have any questions from the audience, or does anyone want to raise your hand and have a question for Deborah?
Indeed, we have a question from Hope. So are your sons and their friends your case studies, e.g. worldview, dialogue, conversations, etc., for teaching and inspiration for writing young adult fiction?
Oh, sure they are. I'm sure that many adults use the young people in their life as inspiration. I find generally when people will send me something and say, hey, will you edit this project for me? It's a middle grade. And then they'll tell me, by the way, I'm a whatever their job is, and I have I have a 12-year-old boy. If they're writing picture books, they'll be like, oh, I have a 3-year-old. I notice that they will tend to write books about what their children's ages are, and mine are that way. And in fact, I dropped my toddlers into and myself, my frazzled self at that age is in the Big Mouth. And also in Honk, If You Hate Me, I did that too, just because it was fun. But definitely I use them as inspiration. It helps you, all the young people help you keep aware of what a young person sounds like and thinks like and what's important to them. So, gosh, they're your research right in your own house.
Well, thanks for that question, Hope. Did we have another question from anyone? If
All right,
not,
I wanted to, you mentioned that, you mentioned the tagging, so it made me think of something. In the story, Big Mouth, the young people rebel against the oppression of the administration of the school. And remember, the theme is ketchup. So the schools are all painted red. So, I say, what's the opposite of ketchup? Mustard. So they start tagging the school with mustard, squirting that on the walls. And that kind of leads me to something that was real interesting for me. I grew up with a lot of TV watching and in the 80s and the 70s and stuff. And so when I was writing this book, I naturally heard commercials at certain parts because I was using so much pop culture that I decided to give into that inner voice, and I inserted commercials into the book. So there are commercial interruptions, jingles, t-shirt ads, and that sort of thing. And just as I was thinking about it today, you made me realize it's kind of his dream to have t-shirts with his face on it. Are you tough enough? Show me tough t-shirts. And he was kind of dreaming. In 2008, I wrote a book about a kid who basically would be now, and he would have a social media page, and he would be an influencer or social media influencer. And you made me think of that in sitting down with the book again after quite a while of not looking at it. So that was fun.
Yeah, those sort of extra bits were a lot of fun. They added a lot to the book. There was an interesting question I saw pop up. Linda asked, who you used for beta readers? Do you use people in your target reader group, or do you use other beta readers?
Right now, I have one beta reader who is a middle grade author. So she knows the space really well. But I tend to, my writers groups that I'm involved with are ones where they're online, or again, with this middle grade author, we meet and we work on our stuff. But the online one is we all log in, say what we're working on, and then we write on our own. And then we come in the end and say how we did. And so far that seems to be working nicely for me. So I haven't made big use of beta readers in my time, but I think they're very helpful. I think that you definitely need someone who knows the space you're writing in well, so they can understand the context for what you're trying to write, even if it's adult horror or adult thriller, certainly middle grade fiction, because every one of these genres have their specific, the audience has their specific expectations. And so I think your beta reader needs to know what that is.
We had another question from Anne asking about, when you're writing a picture book, can you use a older sort of fairy tale style where it's a little wordier? Are there hard and fast word limits if you're trying to get this to market?
It's a really excellent question. In our current market space, picture books tend to be shorter in text and sparer in the telling. If you open them up, you're rarely going to find one that has a big block of text on there. Children's book ages, picture book ages, there's the 0 to 3, which are the little tiny kind of young board books, but 3 to age 7 is the primary age range. And even the ones going for age 7 don't necessarily have a lot of text in them. Something like a nonfiction or a picture book biography might have a little more, but even then, not so much. That's an older style that sometimes we lament. We really, so many of us grew up with them and we love them, but they just don't find that space. Generally, you want to keep it around 600 words, which is not a lot, and it's hard. Over 800, I wouldn't advise. So it's tricky.
Well, these always go by so fast, and I probably have another 2 hours of questions, but we're gonna have to close it out. So I want to thank you again, and I want to say next month in our Scene of First episode, we're welcoming Mary Sangiovanni, who is called the Queen of Cosmic Horror. And her latest book is an official book in the Alien franchise series. So I'm a big fan of the Alien movies. It's a really fun book. I'm looking forward to that. And Deborah, thank you so much for being here. You gave us a lot of great information. It's really wonderful that you could spend a little of the evening with us today.
Oh, very fun. I appreciate it. Thank you.
And we will see everyone next time, and be sure to check out lots of other events in the Fictionary community. Thank you, everyone. Good night.